Hey everybody, welcome back to Terminus, the honey pop double date of extreme metal podcasts. I am the death metal guy, aka showing anime girls my collection of LLN tapes.
And I am the black metal guy, aka squinting hard out the window at something nobody can see.
It feels like, yeah, but you live in a basement though. Do you even have a window?
I have one nice big window luckily facing the southern sky, so that's good.
That's not bad.
Yeah, it's a fine basement, but yes, I'm immune to when anyone says you just live in a fucking basement. I can be like, damn straight.
It's underground, man, for an underground guy.
Yeah.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we have some heartbreaking news for you. Friendship ended with Grizzly Butts. Now, another metal blog will be our best friend.
Oh, we gotta find a new sugar daddy.
I've been making inroads with some of our buddies. You know, we'll see what happens.
Nice. So, what exactly happened? How would you describe this?
I mean, you're the more measured and charitable one. Maybe it's fair that you describe it.
All right, I'll go first. Well, I was going to say, what happened to it appears that, mysteriously, all of the links to our material that had been on Grizzly Butts' site disappeared. That includes the only thing left there are some mentions in news articles where he then links to our post somewhere, and those links are all dead. The original post about our site, link dead. We appear to have been purged. And the only way one can explain this is that I had an exchange with him where he was very unhappy about our Stargazer review. He said so. I'll just, I'm not gonna, drag everything through the mud, but he said something fairly insulting. I said, we are open to constructive criticism, but that's uncalled for. And I thought we left it in a chill place, but I guess not.
Apparently not, man. Apparently, the dignity of Stargazer is... Also, it should be noted, all of these removals happened without discussion with us. The black metal guy has been the main point of contact between our show and Grizzly Butts, but just spontaneously, everything was removed, and here we are. And then
to be fair, he certainly doesn't owe us hosting us on his site, right? He can do whatever he wants, but it is, and he was doing us a favor by putting us up there in the first place. But it is a pretty sudden, let's say a sudden and confusing and somewhat, let's say, irksome turn of events.
And then in completely unrelated news, just
utterly unrelated,
no connection whatsoever to this previous bit of news, we had this scathing comment that was posted regarding our review of Stargazer on our YouTube upload for it, from some gentleman who was apparently intensely upset about it, who created a burner account just to describe how incompetent and uninformed we were. Very interesting material.
Possibly subscribed in order to unsubscribe.
Yes, subscribed in order to unsubscribe. Fascinating comment. If you haven't read it, we've pinned it because, it's very illuminating about just how incompetent we are. Fascinating sort of thought processes in it. Extremely selective listening about our critiques.
Yes, let's put it charitably.
That sort of thing.
Certainly shows us for being unfamiliar with the works of Peter Brotzmann.
I've
or
certainly
whatever his
not
name
mentioned.
is. Yeah.
I've certainly not mentioned Peter Brotzman's machine gun on the show multiple times before this episode, but that's neither here nor there. So yes. it's a lot of fun. But I'm all about moving forward. You could call me a futurist in a way. So let's talk about some things that actually matter. Black Metal Guy, what's going on in the
Which will also
Terminus?
Which will also be returning to the glorious past before we were sponsored by Grizzly Butts.
Yes, certainly. We have tossed the yoke of big metal journalism off us, and we are once again independent, striking forth into the abyss. So, Black Metal Guy,
right,
with that
into
said,
the heart. Yeah.
What is going on in the greater Terminus co-prosperity sphere? Because you've actually got some pretty cool news that I'm excited about when I saw you write it in our notes.
Oh God, yeah, no, because I put it on the spreadsheet, and I'm realizing I had to hunt for it on the spreadsheet now. Was it the band with the cool album title or the cool band name?
Yeah, Lair of the Xenolich? Yeah.
Lair of Xenolich. Yeah. I was like, this is yeah, I was thinking this reminds me. Let's check out 2 new death metal releases. One is by a band that has the brilliant name, Lair of Xenolich, out on Everlasting Spew, which is a record label you've repped before here, right? It's an Italian label?
They're very good, brutal death label. I think they've been around for a little while, but they're starting to attain some prominence just over the past year and a half or so. I think that we covered one record on Everlasting Spew. I'm blanking on which it was last year, but very fun label.
Yeah, and so we'll listen to that, and then I got another related one by a more established band that we should check out, and I think they'll compare well. But
okay, cool.
Yeah, so as far as Lair of Xenolich, their best song title is very clearly Railgun Combat.
You have no idea. You have no idea how turgid I became when I saw that written on the spreadsheet.
Yes. However, I think that song is like a pretty down the line kind of, Behemoth Marduk Blastathon. Not that I have anything wrong with that. But let's start with the first track, Raised Earth Edict, which I remember having some fairly distinctive riffing.
Oh, to clarify, it appears that the band is actually called Black Hole Deity.
Oh, sorry. I knew it. I knew that was the name. So Black Hole Deity, the record is called Lair of Xenolich, and I just wrote in the notes, Lair of Xenolich.
You were just so like, so is it Necron themed death metal or?
Ooh, well, the cover's really beautiful, actually. It's a great kind of abstract, kind of medieval or Byzantine-looking thing of a skull angel. I don't think it's Necron themed, but it's certainly Necron adjacent.
All right. And which track are we going to be listening to?
No, Raised Earth Edict. I think we should go with the first track.
All right, Raised Earth Edict. Let me pull it up real quick. And, let's just check out a little bit of that. Feels That's a lot of fun. That's apparently it features members of Malignancy, which of course I'm very excited about because Malignancy is one of the coolest bands ever. Awesome part there where they're doing sort of I don't know if it was an overdub or but there was kind of a double snare part where you've got the blast beat and then a second just pounding half note snare over it. Sort of yeah, it's sort of a weird like almost like a cataclysm technique. Very interesting. I like the idea of death metal guys kind of playing with the form of production. Like, you know, maybe it's not fully live. Maybe you're adding in these overdubs. Make this a little bit broader. Very cool stuff.
Yeah, I agree. It's a pretty good... The sound quality in the guitars is also pretty, I think, distinctive. Normally in something like this, you get a thinner kind of MIDI guitar sound, right? More like buzz sawing power chord kind of thing. Here it's very burly and has a kind of definitely a good example of deliberately inorganic sound, right? And I think there's like been no attempt to reinvent the wheel in terms of the riffing, but you hear riff types that are not often pushed away in their little sonic ghettos, like that first kind of a Monomarthy riff, and then we get this more kind of Morbid Angel-y riff. These riffs can go side by side, why not, right? If the common denominator is just all the blast beats. All the blast beats holding them together, right?
I definitely hear the Morbid Angel, and you described some like kind of behemoth kind of technique in there. That's true also. And it looks like the member of Malignancy on this is Mike Heller, the drummer, who is basically unquestionably one of the best extreme metal drummers in the world right now. So this is actually him playing much more restrained than he usually does, but it still has just the pure physical force behind it, and the sort of elegance and precise timing that we've come to expect from him.
Yeah, and it's, there's nice timing in the riffs, too. It reminded me of, that one really good single-string trem riff on the Altered Dead record? Mm-hmm. The single-string trem works kind of similarly here, where it's like you hear what's beginning to be a standard riff, and then there's some interesting surprise timing thing that happens, right? Just a little slither in a different place. Yeah. So I think it's, quite good, subtle songwriting in a standard style, more inventive than it initially appears, right?
Yeah, definitely.
All right, so let's compare this with a band who I've been wanting to cover for a long time. Hopefully they do a full length soon. A band called Deiquisitor, which I believe is somehow, they're from Denmark, and I believe they're somehow connected to the great old school Danish band, relatively old school band, Bloodfest. Mm-hmm. Is it? Yes. They are, just double checking that. Yeah, they share some members with the last Bloodfest lineup. And one thing they have in common is, I think it's probably the same guy doing the art. They have this sort of like surreal dark fantasy artwork that is very unique to this band, and it sort of creates a self-enclosed sort of symbolic world, which is cool.
Yeah, it's kind of like just looking at the newest release. It's kind of like H.R. Giger meets thrash line drawing in your math notebook at school, which is a cool aesthetic idea.
Yeah, this one's a little more mechanoid. The last one had just this bizarre sort of like lunar city with just temples, like funny looking demons coming out of temples and like vomiting on things or something, and just like, but it seemed like a busy place that was a lively kind of lunar demon city. You know what I mean?
It's busy town after dark.
Yeah, there's something weirdly affirmative and cheery wouldn't be the right word, but there's something weirdly affirmative about this band. And how to describe them, basically like, do you like Immolation? Do you like Marduk? Do you like non-stop wall-to-wall skronk blast attack? Well, if you don't, you should turn off the next 2 minutes. So let's go for, well, Below the Frozen Tundra. That's a classic song title, and it usually bodes well.
All right, let's check it out. it's listening to Danish death metal is always interesting because there's sort of a weird like regional aspects to it. Like Danish death metal bands always have vocals that are kind of like way lower than they should be, like way more extreme than like the style of death metal that they're playing. Like that was a classic thing about Ill Disposed, that melodeath band that I talk about sometimes. They've got this unbelievably ultra low vocal presence that seems at odds at first, but then works really well with the music.
Yeah, I mean, what do you make of the, was my description on point? I mean, you know, the funny thing is that compared to their earlier stuff, this track, Below the Fleurs and Tundra, is rather subtle. You know, there's... It kind of opens out with some of that chug, or like there's like blasting that feels a little bit more mid-tempo, and they give a little more room to breathe for the textured skronk guitar. But yeah, what did you enjoy the riffs?
Oh, I did. I mean, I think that I did enjoy the riffs, but this is not a band that's about riffs. It's about pure fucking aggressive death metal energy. A thing that I would compare it to, which is sort of a forgotten band from Denmark, actually, would be Panzerchrist. Have you ever listened to them?
Heard of, on the many list of bands with Panzer in their names.
Well, they're very cool, just like gnarly, aggressive, like potently non-atmospheric in a good way death metal. Like on Metal Archives, they're described as, you know, like Black Death, but no, they're just a death metal band to me. But yeah, it's got a similar, just like pummeling fucking 0 to 60 quality that this does, and it's always good to have bands like that where it's like, oh, subtlety, that's lame. Let's just hit the drums and the guitars really hard.
I think that's true. I think it's almost like, I think it's another version of the horror vacui effect where like some care has gone into the chording and writing on each of these riffs, but they're definitely all supposed to blend together. Like just this one sort of continuum of, what you pick up is the general harmonic quality of it and the sort of rhythmic punches of the chugs, and that's pretty much what it is.
Definitely. And speaking of horror vacui, it's funny because now we'll do our rundown of records, and finally we found a record with that as the title. Or rather a song on the record as the title.
Oh, good point.
Yeah. Which I thought was very interesting, especially given that band. So we're doing the sandwich today. It's my 2 records on the outside and yours on the inside. So we're going to be opening up today with Ad Nauseam with Imperative Imperceptible Impulse out on Avantgarde Music. This is an Italian, I would call it abstract tech death. Although, you know, when we get into the review, I would say that it's kind of beyond death metal at this point. This is their second full length, the first that I have heard, however. First one came out in 2016, and gotta say, this one is a fucking doozy. And that's an academic turn right there.
Yeah, no, it's a pretty cool record. All right. Next up, we've got, is this my pick or yours? I guess this one's your pick, technically. Who knows? Today was messed around a little bit.
Yeah. I think you picked it, but this is coming from the recommendation of one of our patrons, so it's kind of both of ours.
Yeah, okay, so this is Aphelion, The Chill of Heaven's Abandonment. And this is a band that has made a little bit of waves in the underground, I think. They've put out some strong demo material. And it's American black metal, but it's got a kind of distinctive low-end murkiness to it that you don't often get from American bands or really any black metal bands right now. So, interested to check that out.
Yep. And what else you got?
Oh, yeah. So my next one is Ulvegr, Isblod. And this is out on Ashen Dominion. I think back in the day, as far as Ashen Dominion, I'm pretty sure we reviewed that Cores album.
Oh,
also on Ashen Dominion. So I'm happy to say we can give a more positive review to this one. And Ulvegr is down the line pummeling Slav black, but like with much closer to what you'd identify with like really aggressive mid-90s black metal. So it's pretty cool. I like this one a lot.
Yeah. And rounding us out, it came out, we had to cover it. It's technically my pick, but yeah, I wouldn't know to do it without you. We've got Pan-Amerikan Native Front with the second full-length Little Turtles War, which is out on, apparently, every fucking label, such as Stygian Black Hand in the US, Les Fleurs du Mal in Canada, and Death Cult for the European audience. Obviously, we covered the split between Ifernach and Pan-Amerikan Native Front last year, and,
Episode 26.
Episode 26, yes. And then, well, shit, man. I mean, we're making Outlaw Rock happen. And here's another landmark recording for Outlaw Rock. So we're definitely excited to talk about it. Alright, so first up on the docket, we have Ad Nauseam with Imperative Imperceptible Impulse. Like I said, this is the second full-length by this group. First one was back in 2016. Wasn't really paying attention to tech death at the time, so I missed it. But now I want to go back, because listening to this is... I immediately fell in love with this record. Because these are some of the most horrible noises I've ever heard. in a good way. I love the, well, I mean, shit, how do you even describe it? Because I know what's going to happen, is a lot of people are going to lump this in with, Deathspell Omega, with Ulcerate, all of these sort of, like, hyper-dissonant tech bands, but I feel like this isn't just worship of that style. I feel like it extends further. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, I think what people are going to be doing is lumping it into this horrible, horrible niche that gets called dissonant black death, which is just as stupid as the label atmospheric black metal, because like almost all black metal involves dissonance, at least until recently. Mm-hmm. And just as almost all black metal involves atmosphere, or like all of it, right? And sometimes people use dissonant just to mean... People sometimes describe Migla as dissonant, because I think what they're talking about is actually the guitar tone. That sort of inorganic, glistening guitar tone. Here's a great YouTube comment. Blackened slammy death metacore. One of the best genre mixes ever. Comment under it. No slam or deathcore band has come even close to this level of composition. Blah, blah, blah. Somebody says...
What the fuck is even going on YouTube? You know?
Somebody says, dissonant death black metal is what I would call it if I attempted to use less words. So, I mean, yeah, this is another one of those sort of parallel universe metal scenes, right? That has, year zero is when Pericletus comes out, or whichever Ulcerate record. But of course, none of this stuff really sounds like... The stuff that gets lumped in this dissonant black death thing doesn't sound like, Deathspell Omega, which is a black metal band, or Ulcerate, which is a good death metal band, right? It's just this kind of like, autistic in the bad sense, autistically technical skronk music, right? Mm-hmm. And, on last year's year-end list, I sort of ranted about how bands like Serpent Column get lumped into this genre.
Yeah.
And that's what's going to happen. That's what's going to happen to this band too, even though it's kind of... Serpent Column is way closer to black metal than you'd think, and than people think. And this is just, as you say, kind of beyond death metal for sure. Mm.
Yeah, which is an interesting thing, because now this is something we've talked about already in mid-February on a few records this year. We talked about it with the Mephitis record, which is... sort of like At the Gates, The Red in the Sky is Ours, but so overdriven it's kind of transcended death metal. And we talked about it, I think it was last episode, with the Astral Tomb EP that I brought on, which is, in a very opposite way, instead of maximalist, it is minimalist, hyper-technical in a very abstract way, and not really like death metal anymore. And I would say that this falls in too. I love this record, but I wouldn't call it really a death metal record anymore. I think this is really, like the Mephitis record, closer to classical music than it is heavy metal. It's closer to abstract early 20th century classical music, like sort of a Penderecki style, which I believe is an actual influence on these guys.
Doesn't this album or the one before open with a Penderecki sample?
Does it? I mean, it's entirely possible.
I might have accidentally clicked on the record. I did accidentally click on the record before this first, so it could have been that one. Let me see real quick. I'm going to check whether it's this one. No, it's the other one. Their last record opens with a Penderecki sample, and if it's not a Penderecki sample, then it's a remarkable attempt to imitate that on keyboards,
So, this is, I guess to describe it, I mean, it's clearly, I would say that all this kind of like modern disso death stuff is descended fundamentally from Gorguts Obscura. And I would say this is a very close attempt to replicate their methodology on that record. I've read interviews with Luc Lemay about how that they came up with that. And it seems like the defining element for them was to stop thinking of music in terms of notes, but purely as sound objects in a way. And I think something very similar is going on this record, because I've read some stuff about this band. Apparently they basically created all their own gear for this band. I think one of the guys is an electrical engineer, and there's a couple other kind of technically minded people in the band, so they basically built their own amps and their own custom guitars and instruments, like sort of a weird handmade snare drum, but you see what that means. I mean, that couldn't just be like autistic prog shit, but what you see is really an emphasis on sound, of pure sound divorced from melody, from harmony, things like that, pure sound objects. And I think that's what makes this music so exciting for me. It's really beyond the structure of music as we understand it.
Yeah, in that sense, it's kind of like the highbrow answer to the Astral Tomb, right? Where they were also using pure sound object, right? Just bending one shrieking note, or using feedback, or just relentlessly chugging in these strange time signatures, right?
Yeah.
This is so this is kind of similar idea on the opposite end of the spectrum. There's honestly, I would recommend people, I rarely say this, I would recommend people read the description on their Bandcamp, because there's a lot of kind of cool info about this band. It seems like they think they were very invested in melody and harmony, but they were trying to put it into, they want harmony obtained by means of disharmony and melody by dissonance. To push this method even further, a unique tuning system has been conceived. So that's what you said. To allow a new harmonic vocabulary and eradicate the players from the comfort zone of the usual patterns every guitar and bass player is used to.
Yeah, no, there's definitely clearly some influence of like Schoenberg, like 12-tone serialism on this. I have no doubt there's probably riffs, if you could call them riffs, that are full like 12-tone serialist things on this.
Except they don't sound bad.
Well, they sound bad in the right way. Mm-hmm. It's because I want to stress just how I thought I was inoculated to hyper abrasive music, but this stuff makes your brain scream. This is just like horribly unnatural shit. It's outstanding. But yeah,
I think I would describe this as, it sort of sounds like knocking a clock off the mantle, and it will make you want to knock a clock off the mantle.
That's fair. Well, let's do a
Why don't we give them a sample then?
Yeah. So Here's something off the first track, Subspecie Eternitatis. And yeah, let's just check this section out and then talk about it, you know? Oh, holy fuck, man. Jesus Christ.
That was fun.
It's something. I don't know if I describe it as fun, but I mean, definitely a sort of sadistic grin came across my face listening to this, because I was like, it just felt like I described it in the notes as this record feels like it's melting while it's being played. Like it's just there's a sense of like physical contortion to this music that I don't know if I've fully heard before.
Well, the place where we have heard it is Portal, right? That was the remarkable thing. Portal sounded like it was being played backwards and melting. However, this is getting to a very similar effect. Portal got there by blurring everything. This is getting to a similar effect with all these kinds of crystalline sounds.
Yeah.
Like, just every, like, if you listen closely to if you listen to just the weave of it, it sounds like horrible skronk. But if you listen closely to it, you will hear different melodies and harmonies kind of weaving around each other. The other thing I was struck by was, like, you know, like, although this is certainly outside the metal riff, there are riffs here. Like, there was, like, that sort of, like, four-time repeated descending pattern just before it sort of broke down at the end. Mm-hmm. You could hear that was, like, a theme. And then you could hear those... That was, like, maybe where the voices came together a little bit, the sort of bending, cascading downward effect. And then they sort of broke up into this weird counterpoint or set of harmonies.
Yeah. I think that's one of the things that makes this so interesting is, like, and I'll describe this more on a later sample, but it feels like this is a band who are etching melodic ideas out of negative space. It's like they're writing around a melody and just hinting at its existence through the shapes around it. It's extremely hard to describe. But there's so many times where it's like you hear almost this ghost melody constructed out of these dissonant notes periodically intersecting and coming apart from one another that gestures to something that's actually like a normal melody as we would understand it. And I think this has to do with kind of the thematics of the record. Because I don't know, have you checked out any of the lyrics to this?
No.
The lyrics are fucking awesome. They belong to a specific strain of bizarre abstract tech death lyrics, but I feel like they're kind of a key to the whole record to understanding what it's about. Like, for instance, off this song, just the first few passages go like this. I am looking for the face I had before the world was made. I am looking for the flawed plot of an immortal intelligence. Acts are my symbols are my maze. I feel I woke up in another dream. If I could hear all the sounds of the world, I would recognize my own steps, walking in a single instant all of my lives. A god shall say only one word. In that word fullness shines. No voice articulated by him can be inferior to the universe. Can a god make sure it is no more what it was? So there's this, and this is something that kind of echoes to the record, this idea of void, this idea of, like, space beyond time. You know, because, like, ulcerate lyrics are kind of apocalyptic. And Deathspell Omega lyrics are kind of, like, pseudo-religious and abstract, but then these guys are, like, we're totally beyond
they are
material
religious.
reality. Yeah.
Deathspell Omega lyrics are religious. Yeah. That's a very serious part of it. But
in this case,
yeah, I take your point. Yeah.
Well, no, it's just like the sheer abstraction is like we're truly trying to go to a place beyond. I don't want to say material reality, although I guess I just said that because it is still very material in a way, but it's totally. It has none of the reference points that we understand.
It's trying to get at fundamental structures of, structures that are trying to figure out what gods are.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Which requires sort of going, it's sort of beyond, it's beyond just the gods, right? It's dealing with, I love this moment, and, great lyric. Fate consists of a single instant, the moment when a man knows forever that he isn't who he is. I am confusing myself with the shape of my destiny. Now I see only one sun exists once.
That's so fucking good. Holy shit.
Yeah, you know what I like about this? There's a similar kind of, a band like Ulcerate, or like, I'm thinking like the first Mephitis record. They can have these sort of intensely apocalyptic lyrics about decline and collapse, right? And Mephitis say in an interview, specifically, it's not coming from a nihilistic perspective, but they're interested in, the collapse of the world we've inherited, right? They're not saying that, oh, everything's meaningless, oh, blah blah blah, right? However, the lyrics are extremely negative, which is the point again. But I like that this band, which makes horrifying noise, has kind of moments in the lyrics that are affirmative in that way. I don't know what the plot. I don't know what the plot arc of this record is, but even if I look at the last track, like Human Interface to No God, well, that certainly sounds bleaker, but even then, it's not. Even then, it's not this sort of conclusively nihilistic standpoint. It seems to be about disorientation, in disorientation in the world.
That seems to be the main theme of this record is the loss of orientation, the destruction of notions of reality, and like the recreation of the self. Like some of it reminds me of like some of the most profound moments of like deeply like hard-edged atheist writing, like viciously like self-resolute, where it's and the hardest edged atheist writing is accidentally kind of religious because it's about, in a world where there are no gods, but the subtext is kind of rather that the gods have abandoned us. How do we define ourselves as people? Yada, yada, yada. And that's kind of the dimension I think this is coming from. How do we tear the veil away from reality, or what we perceive as reality, to access its core fundamental structure, and what do we do with it when we get there?
All right. So, yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm with that. I don't know if I get an atheistic sense from this, but I guess you've read more of the lyrics than I have, right? Would this be
Oh,
the
yeah, I read
appropriate
about
time to talk about the? Would this be the appropriate time to talk about the cover, or should we save that for the end?
I can talk about it at the end. Let's do one of your samples.
All right, let's keep moving. Okay. So yeah, I find this album. I mean, obviously, it's extremely sadistic, but remarkably listenable for all that. I did not. Normally, you might find it a pain to listen to 54 minutes of extremely abrasive and demanding kind of stuff like this. Not so. I enjoyed it. It has a and I think moments on this record are sort of exuberant. So I'll just play the beginning of "Inexorably Ousted Senta," and I'll just say I found this surprisingly moshable.
All right, let's do it. Can you imagine seeing this live?
I wonder if they play live.
Yeah, I'm curious because I feel like, as cool as it is to listen to on record, I think that maybe the real environment for this is live. Like,
well, on their Bandcamp page, it does show them playing live on the band's own Bandcamp.
Okay, cool. I gotta fucking see this shit happen in real time. Cause like, oh man, just it's like you almost don't know how to react to it. It's like, do you just stand there with your mouth open watching what's happening, or do you?
I just windmilled all over my room in double time. I did a spin kick, bro.
It's weirdly. No, you're right. I think that denying the physical aspect of this music is missing a big part of it. Also, outstanding.
Yeah, the best. I think the best avant-garde metal is made by people who understand, who like actually like metal, and who understand what makes it exciting. And so that's that kind of idea of music adjacency that I think this band has that for sure, where it's like it's going to give you a lot of effects that you get on a metal record, just not in any way you've heard before. Seeing it live also, fair. Like, this struck me, I mean, yeah, seeing it live also is like, this struck me as closely related to jazz, too. Or as having the same kind of, which I know, we often say jazz and classical in the same, when we're talking about any kind of avant-garde stuff, but there's certainly an embrace of the musicians playing with each other. and it's the sort of the sharp discontinuities. I know you get that in a lot of modern classical stuff too, but there's the sense of, I guess what I mean is there's a sense of openness to the music, which you identify with negative space.
Yeah, well, I think that's an interesting idea. Is like it's always kind of a Rorschach test when you listen to something like this. Is what do you identify these kind of ineffable characteristics as? You know what I mean?
Yeah, and so one thing that's cool about this, I mean, in a lot of ways, given that we got in trouble for, I guess, being a little too harsh on Stargazer, you can take a record like this as and granted, I like Stargazer's older stuff, right? And I was kind of trying to, push back on the critique and sort of point out what I thought were some strengths about that record, but you can definitely see that this is some similar ideas in basic... The idea of making sort of anti-heavy death metal, right? Mm-hmm. Like, the guitars the tones are extremely clean and organic sound, relatively quiet production, moments where the drummer is blasting, it doesn't even necessarily feel fast, which is very much a jazz thing. And yet, yeah, so it definitely attains some of the things that Stargazer was working for, but like it also brings all of the physicality of metal, and it's also, whereas the Stargazer, I think, like hewed too close to pop melody and to sort of like 70s prog, this is they took the trouble to make their own harmonic universe, right?
Yeah. I mean, I was gonna say, like, even on this song, the closing couplet of lyrics is, "Intellect lost the ultimate evolutionist race between species," which is kind of fascinating. It's just like the idea, like, even in music as like kind of insane and technical and accomplished as this, the argument is that those ideas are sort of petty human concerns. I think that what I love so much about this is just how intensely alien it is.
This band, they don't have their heads up their asses. They're not conceited and trying to make intelligent music. Yeah, I like what you're saying. Yeah, it definitely is. The whole point of this record is you yourself, and certainly humanity, are not the center of the universe. And your mind is your mind is an effect, not a cause.
Oh, it's some of the most deeply inhuman music I think we've ever covered on the show. It's like, this has nothing to do with the likes of man.
Yeah. So let's go to next sample, related to like building their own harmonic language. This band does something that I'm sure there are a few bands, especially in the disso black niche or disso death niche. I'm sure some bands have done this already, but like this band uses alternate tunings, right? And that's a thing, that a possibility that was really implied by black metal guitar years and years ago, but almost nobody actually did, right? I mean, obviously you'd move around, you'd tune your guitar up or down or change a few things about it, right? But like, there was an urban legend that Transylvanian Hunger was recorded in an open tuning. But like, basically that kind of thing remained the province of kind of art rock. But here, I think this record is a really good example of the 10-year rule, where like, okay, finally, people who actually like black and death metal and actually like stuff from the post-punk, experimental art rock scenes or whatever are using those techniques in an extreme metal context or just extreme music context. So it's also a good example of the negative space you've talked about. So let's go to Here in the Middle of Coincidentia Oppositorum.
It's like one thing that I didn't mention before is like, there's huge stretches on this album, minutes at a time, of just accumulating tension, and it doesn't ever really get released. It's just these horrible, like, anxious kind of clean passages. And it's like, even there, it like goes back into a more metallic kind of that's a very Deathspell Omega sort of riff at the very end of that sample.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
But it's not really releasing the tension of the previous part. It just keeps building it up, and usually it never gets released. It's just this horrible, like, void of anxiety and fear. And at no point on the record does it ever discharge it in a cathartic moment. It just feels bad psychologically all the time.
That's interesting. I felt that as a big release moment. Like, to me, you can really headbang to that. And that's one thing that's satisfying about it, is that there's all of this building, and then there's something that sort of approximates a big mosh part. I get what you mean in the sense that they never shift out of, they're never going to give you a consonant melody or something, right? They always remain in this dissonant framework. But, like, I get that. You know, it's definitely it just is really tense music, for sure. Mm-hmm. You know, but, like, so I get what you mean, but I think like, I also hear that as like a big heavy headbanging part. But, like, let's talk about the middle of that, which is, or, you know, I think you could hear some of the jazzy stuff as it kind of escalated towards the big break in the middle. You could hear one of the guitars kind of straining against another. And related to what you were saying about tension, a thing that the Stargazer had at its best that was jazzy, and that something like Defeated Sanity always has, is this sense of energies or tensions being sort of delicately counterposed, distributed through the whole system in a way that's way more like jazz heaviness than metal heaviness.
Yeah.
And so this definitely has that, where you get the sense that these instruments are sort of like playing against each other, playing off each other, very difficult to center the one most important part. But yeah, that middle part with the big sort of chiming guitars, you know, who knows what the actual reference point for that is. And I suppose this is on the rather poppy side for noise guitar. But I thought we would just listen to this part from Sonic Youth's Bad Moon Rising. This track is called I'm Insane.
That's really interesting to listen to, you know, just because I've never really delved into Sonic Youth, you know, it's like the kind of thing that probably would appeal to me, but it's just like, oh man, that's just a little bit too arty punk for me. You know what I mean? Which is unfair.
You like
but, you know
you
what I mean.
you like plenty of stuff. That I think you like more classically square glasses stuff than I do. You know, you like I'm trying to think of a good example, but there's like certain like full blown kind of indie things that you like.
That's fair. Yeah. I think that I don't know, I just come at it from this outside perspective, which psychologically protects me from acknowledging I'm one of those people.
Well, so Sonic Youth, I mean, it doesn't really emotionally resonate with me the way it did when I was a kid, although going back to this record makes me want to start listening to this, maybe some of their more out there stuff again. I very specifically connect it with living in a city, and it's very hard to appreciate it. City, New York sublimity that you only really get there, and it only like, you know, you listen to Sonic Youth in some place like that, and you feel like you get something about the place, and you feel cool, and you feel connected to this long sort of tradition of this sort of punk art rock or whatever. But you know, it's almost if you're not living someplace like that, then it's almost like younger man's music, I think. But this part is sick. And you know, the thing is, a lot of their later stuff, you know, Daydream Nation or whatever, is fairly poppy. Their early stuff has a lot of moments like this where it's just super abrasive and weird.
Oh yeah, I was about to say I didn't expect it to sound as much like Godflesh as it does.
Yeah, and this is in '85 too, so the Godflesh would have been listening to this. It's this is all in that school of New York bands that were influenced by British post-punk bands, and this is the interesting thing. Also, is that the whole record, Bad Moon Rising, it all pretty much sounds like that. Like there are moments with vocals and moments like you could hear that groove kind of picking up right there, but like. The whole thing is pretty damn uncompromising.
Well, yeah, I mean, I can hear how it connects to Killing Joke. I can hear how it connects to, like, no wave stuff in general. There's, like, swans in there. So, that might be something I've actually got to check out. I got to finally take the plunge and listen to Sonic Youth seriously.
Yeah, Sonic Youth would basically be considered, like, the most popular wing of the no wave thing. Like, they were sort of associated with that movement when they started. Certainly both them and Swans were interested in translating ideas from Killing Joke into a U.S. context.
I can dig that.
Yeah. But yeah, so there's that just for you fans. If you haven't listened to Sonic Youth, definitely worth listening to Bad Moon Rising and some of their other stuff. I mean, Sister's a great record, too, if you want it a little more sort of with some more kind of power chord-ish stuff. However, that's the thing, is that Sonic Youth were one of the first bands that was really known for doing alternate tunings, which is a technique they imported from sort of academic classical music. They made, you know, prepared guitars. They'd have, in live sets, they'd have different guitars for different songs. And so, like, they're just a classic example of doing that. And this Ad Nauseam is using prepared guitars, and they are... and you can hear these just massive clanging Sonic Youth voids in the middle of the songs.
Yeah, I dig that. So, last sample. Here's one that's almost like music. So, let's listen to a little bit of the title track, Imperative, Imperceptible, Impulse. And this really gets into the negative space thing I've been talking about. You will hear a melody, but it's etched out of absence of melody. There is a negative space that points to something very distinct here. And so, as abstract as that is, I think everyone will pick up on it. So, let's give it a shot.
This part's great. Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's awesome. Let's do it. So do you hear what I mean in terms of, like, there's something there. There's a big, like, black metal melody, actually. Almost like a sort of, like, gothic style, like, French black metal melody. Like, almost depressive style. But you only get it through its absence. They're writing around that melody. But what you're supposed to hear as a listener is that melody, the outline of it, this absence that you're psychologically reinserting into the music, if that makes any sense at all. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I get what you mean. They've got they're paying a lot of attention to the guitar interplay, and they've got the left and right. They've got different guitars mixed in different channels, right? Mm-hmm. And so they can be playing.
That's a big part of this.
Yeah, they're like literal. I get more what you mean now, because like one can hear the melody, but they are literally, there's a consonant version of the melody that they're not playing because they're playing in tandem on either side of it. And somehow it emerges from all of that, which is that's pretty cool. As far as the melodic sensibility, you actually also will get stuff like that on the more recent Ulcerate. With that specific kind of weird sliding shape, but also very sort of crystalline and beautiful. But yeah, I hear what you mean, it being like a French melody. It could also be a DSO thing. But that's like the one... And it's like, there it is. That's your big climax on the record. There's the big riff.
And it's they won't play it. I mean, they're not going to just play it. Mm-hmm. These guys are, even beyond DSO or Ulcerate, they are so resolute in their refusal to play that big riff that fits there. Which is something I respect a lot about this record, and one of the reasons that I think I could say this might end up on my year-end list, because this is just so fucking out there. It just has such a deep commitment and respect for its own conceit, you know? It's like we've set up these parameters for how we're going to write this music, and nothing is going to change that. We will not allow ourselves to deviate from that, no matter how good the idea might be, or how they're like sacrificing the ultimate pleasure of the song for how fixated they are on this idea. And I mean, fuck, if that's not art, what is?
Hey, it's Kari from Sepulchre Curse.
And I'm Jakob.
You're listening to Terminus.
Alright, and we are back with Aphelion, with the Chill of Heaven's Abandonment. So, like you were saying, this appears to be a band that's gotten some attention kind of in like in the, I don't know, is Instagram black metal scene a derisive term? I don't think it is.
Yes.
But
I feel like Aphelion has done better on YouTube. I feel like I've been recommended their stuff a lot on YouTube, is where I've seen it.
Yeah.
I would actually say it's kind of outside the orbit of bands that I'm in the bands and labels that I'm in immediate contact with.
Yeah, so Aphelion, they've done a couple tapes, kind of like demo EP tapes. They did a comp of both of them, and then now this is their first full length. And like we were saying up top, this is off the recommendation of one of our patrons, who is actually a... Jesus Christ, I totally forgot to do the social media and patron thing at the top of the hour. God damn. I'm failing miserably in my job. But yeah, if you want to be able to recommend your buddies' bands, you can subscribe to us on Patreon, etc., etc. You already know the fucking shtick. Anyway...
Also, if you're listening, if you're a relatively new listener and you have not yet subscribed to us on YouTube, you might consider throwing us a like and or subscribe. Even if you listen on another medium primarily, like, podcast proper or whatever, if you've got some random old disused YouTube account from college, we would always appreciate your help in boost our signal.
Absolutely. Whatever we can do to overcome the algorithm that oppresses that oppresses extreme metal fans so much.
For real.
But so this is a band from Missouri, and the Midwestern.
Sorry, I've just got to do your part to get Terminus on trending.
Oh God, I can't imagine a more ignominious end to the podcast. But
Terminus reviews 10 new kinds of makeup.
Oof. That's what we need to get into, man. We need to get into
True.
We'll just start doing reaction videos, makeup tutorials, that kind of shit. Just go
paint,
all in.
Corpse paint makeup tutorial and prank videos.
Yeah, we tell a guy, in an Explosions in the Sky show that the new Jesu record is actually a black metal band or something. I don't know. We'll figure it out. So the Midwestern black metal scene is kind of curious, just because, kind of Greater Chicago area produced stuff like Judas Iscariot, but in terms of a conscious metal scene, stuff always kind of pops up in fits and starts in the lower Midwest. Obviously, you get up to Illinois, Michigan, stuff like that, it's a little bit different, but Missouri, Kansas, Arkansas, stuff like that is always it's always kind of a mixed bag. It's guys kind of emerging from a scene that doesn't exist and kind of reaching out. So I think it's always interesting to check out some of these guys.
Yeah. So I guess the first thing I would identify this band with is this reminds me of the first Behexen record, which used to be mentioned in the same breath as Sargeist or Horna or Satanic Warmaster. Mm-hmm. Since then, Behexen has kind of tacked into orthodox black metal, and although I think they eventually made a pretty good record in that vein, it's definitely nothing like Celebration of Christ's Fall or Fist of the Satanist.
What a cool record title, Fist of the Satanist.
Oh, it's just one of the first songs, but yeah, no, it fucking rules.
Oh, okay.
I know, it's one of those bulldozer mid-tempo songs. Behexen was a great band, and what was distinctive about them was that they had a lot of the classic Finnish melody, but everything was way tuned down. They put a more serious effort into the sort of power chord, sort of brutal riffs. And there was just a murk and it was grim, but not really even in the way the classic second wave bands was. It was all a little more chthonic, You could maybe hear, this is the same country that produced Barrett, right? Or produced Archgoat. And so this band doesn't sound like that record exactly at all, but the general idea of ideas coming in from Finnish black metal, an idea that black metal should have something melodic or epic about it, while also being sort of having this powerful low end, this sense of fuzz in the production, that seems to be the distinguishing feature of this band.
Yeah, that's fair. I think that overall, to get it out front, I like this record. I think that this is a band in search of a center. Because I think we've talked about this a little bit before, especially with kind of younger bands, because Aphelion has only been around, as far as I can tell, for a couple of years now. I feel like this is a band still trying to figure out exactly what it's about. What style of black metal it wants to play. I think these are guys with passions for a lot of different kinds of black metal, but I think they're much stronger in certain veins than others. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would say that I think this is a band that has the whole before the parts. So as far as that overall kind of Behexany concept or whatever, this idea of doing a kind of American murky low-end black metal, that is an interesting idea, and they do kind of execute that throughout the record. They all have another admirable ambition, which we both, I think, picked up on, but we're talking about before the show, which is like, it's got this ambition. One way of interpreting the sort of ton of influences in this record, right, is an attempt to achieve the scope of the early Norwegian bands, right? That full spectrum black metal sound. And the idea that you could do that while mostly drawing riffing strategies from these simpler riffing strategies from these later scenes of underground stuff, right? Like the French or the Slavs or whoever, right? The Finns. That is an idea we saw with Oppressive Dissent, who did a really good job, very focused job of blending those elements while still keeping it kind of lo-fi one man, right? So this band has full band playing, which is a plus for being able to achieve that. But right now the elements are, I think, not blended.
Yeah, I think there's a disparate quality to this record. There is a kind of you use the term like song dump related to that Anal Stab Wound record we covered the other day. It feels like, okay, so they've got a bunch of ideas. These are all kind of like basically good songs individually, but they don't gel together very well as a full-length album. That being said, I do think there's a ton of potential here. I think they're basically good at all these styles, but I think that there's, it's almost like every song is a different avenue of black metal. Every song is like a different exploration. And they've got these moments of just like explosive brilliance. I just think they need to kind of knuckle down, decide exactly what they want to do, and then really kind of deeply investigate how they're going to put that out.
Maybe this is a band that started for fun before they realized they had something more serious to say.
Yeah, I could see that. Because it seems like just looking at the information of the members, they're coming from like the death metal scene, mostly. It seems like all the guys are coming from death metal bands or are still in death metal bands. So maybe this started as like, well, let's do a black metal band as like a fun thing to do together. You got some bros, you're in these different bands in the scene. Let's do our like local super group and just make some fucking black metal, which is cool. But I think that there's something here, and then consciously tapping into it is the way forward. Because there's moments on this record that are, I think, extremely powerful, and they just need to access it a little more consciously for it to really come to fruition.
Okay, so for like, since we're starting with the kind of constructive criticism bit, maybe we should just lead with my sample, which is also the first 2 minutes of the record.
Sure.
So, and you will hear some good riffs here. Some of them you'll like better than others. Those might be different from the riffs I like, right? Who knows? But here comes some solid black metal riffs. The beginning of Severed Tongue Dialect.
So yeah, we were talking a little bit while I was playing, and for me, the centerpiece there is that big kind of emo riff, that dun 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 dun. Fuck yeah, dude! Immediate, yeah, that's huge.
It's a very unique riff. I mean, you can trace it just back to like Burzum too, right? It's a kind of riff. I think we've heard riffs like that in various kinds of styles over the years. Maybe in DSBM with that more emo flavor, maybe.
Yeah.
But like, it's not a riff that this was never the central riff of any kind of style, and like it strikes me as pretty unique, right?
Yeah, so, because it's like it's emotive, but it's also got a huge groove to it. Like I wouldn't call this like an outlaw rock band, but that's an outlaw rock riff right there.
I think at its best the band might be tending there. So we'll talk about that later, but yeah, so for me, like, most of those riffs I like separately. Like, the first initial blasting riff was a great example of the sort of gloomy low-end blasting that I kind of identified with the Hexen. Nice, sort of weirdly timed wiggles in those chords, strange dissonance. You can hear it sounding a little like war metal, too. But like, so that's cool. And then it immediately breaks into this kind of Santana riff, which I'm not crazy about. Da, 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 da. A little bit of samba or whatever. But that I get, it's a unique riff. But then you get like this sort of French style trem thing. And between those two parts, there's a genuine moment of development. The samba thing pays off in the French thing. But, like, that's the only, in a sequence with, like, 4 or 5 different riffs, that's the only moment of development. And you have to have a sense of development if you want to stitch together that many riffs. And then, when the irony is, when they introduce the biggest riff there, it totally breaks the momentum. And I think, like, that is, it's an awkward way to start a record. I think the intent was probably something like an overture. You know what I mean? Like, sort of forecasting a bunch of different stuff to come. But, like, that's tricky.
Well, I think that something that occurred to me just now, listening to this, is I get the impression, I think these were songs developed from jam sessions, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that that can be very good as a starting point, but I think for this band, they jammed out these songs and they kind of left them untouched. They didn't do the sort of post-production work on them, you know what I mean? And every musician is different. Like, for me, I'm a guy where jamming just does not work for me. That is absolutely alien to the way that I write on guitar or play with people. But I think the jam energy can be a real strength if harnessed correctly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. There was just like a second phase of editing that I think, well, you know, I mean, this release is what it is, right? They released a bunch of high energy songs with a bunch of cool riffs in them, and now on the next one they'll start sort of sorting out the parts that are most important to them. Yeah, so, you know, yeah, I find that that first moment is pretty typical of many passages on the record. It is sometimes when they hit a really good idea, they don't give it enough space to breathe.
Oh yeah, they could have, like, that emo riff, they could have played twice as long, no question, and it would have been perfect.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. And you know, yeah, so it's maybe a little too frenetic for its own good. However, I do think there are strong and promising areas of this, and we should go to your sample.
Well, speaking of fucking emo, do you like a giant emo black riff? Because I like a giant emo black riff.
Yeah.
So this is one of the moments on this record. It's like, this is a record that I would be like, okay, it feels like these guys are getting started. They're figuring themselves out. And, ordinarily, I'm jaded enough at this point that I know when to discount something. And, so that part of the first track, Severed Tongue Dialect, that big emo riff got me. And then I heard Victorious Anguish. And then after kind of a protracted intro, they open up the full song with this riff. And this is when I decided that this band moved from cool guys playing around to, oh, there's really something here. So let's check out this shit.
Death metal guy, you know how I feel about emo and black metal, but that was a very good riff.
well, what do you mean I know what you feel about emo and black metal? Fucking, you like emo, you like black metal, you like when they're combined correctly, I
like some emo. It's that was a good version of that kind of riff for sure, and it was way on the emo side for me, but it was unquestionably well executed, and it's compelling, and the timing of it is pretty cool, the way they stretch it out.
Oh yeah, no, I said in the notes, because the way it ends with that rickety kind of drum fill ending on it, where it kind of stretches out the time signature another half note, is that's a very old school DC emo thing to do. It's not it still has that emotional hardcore essence to it, which I think it makes it very distinct amongst a lot of the kind of emo influenced black metal bands today.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking during the segment about how that sounds kind of like it could be a thing in that territory I do like, right? It's Japanese screamo, right? And that reminds me of Swarm.
Oh yeah, Swarm is just fucking great. They're undeniable.
Yeah. We'll have to play that on the show sometime.
Yeah, Swarm, Envy, Heaven in Her Arms, any of those guys. But it's also, what I think is interesting is, I like it more listening to it again now, the way it slips into that kind of mutilation style, sour French tremolo riff. I feel personally like the heart of this band, whether they know it or not, is in the French style. I think that's the strongest material, I think, is when they're blurring the lines of like major and minor key. Like that emo riff is basically like a major key riff, like the saddest kind of major key. And yeah, no, there's just like as soon as I heard the song, I seized on this one. It's like, this is, well, I've got another sample layer, another path for this band, but this is a path for them, I would say.
Yeah, definitely some of the core elements. I mean, that riff is a standout riff on the record. It is, that grabs you. I think the transition to that next one is I like that idea of immediately shifting to a different register. It's maybe if I heard it a few times, I'd start to be like, okay, this is going to be an abrupt transition here, and that's part of the effect. You might have listened to this more times in a row than me. I think that's right. Why don't we go to your next sample?
Yeah. So here's my idea: is like there's paths forward for this band. They just have to decide on what kind of band they are. And here's another version. This is off the track Spires of Fire and Iron, which apparently features an individual named Lord Orats on synths. And as soon as I heard this, I was like, why is this merely featuring him? You should make him a main part of your band, because the synth work adds a whole new dimension. And I've always loved when these kind of garagey black metal bands incorporate synths. There's something about the disparate idea of, keep it garagey, but then add these elements of what we call symphonic black metal and shit. And I think it works out great on this track. So let's just listen to the opening of this song. Bro, here's the thing. I love Dungeons and Dragons, but I'm deeply mentally retarded and I cannot read the Dungeon Master's playbook. Like, I don't know. I don't actually know what this game is about, but I like to drink a lot, and I lean back in my chair and I just describe what my, powerful barbarian is doing. Has nothing to do with the actual game that we're playing. I'm upsetting everyone at the table, but I just talk about how my barbarian, he has sex and he fights goblins. For hours. For hours. I will just sit in a reverie, a drunken reverie with my eyes closed, leaning back. And people try to interrupt me, we're trying to play a game here, and I'll just be like, shh. And then, Orgar the Mighty lifts up another tavern wench with one powerful arm and starts eating her pussy. I don't fucking...
Whoa. Terminus is a PG-13 show.
I'll keep that in mind in the future. But no, it's I love when shit is it's got that garage punk energy, and then you throw in the synths, and it seems incorrect at first, and then it's like, it makes perfect sense. It is like being a teenager in high school and playing fucking D&D again, which is an idea that, like, dungeon synth guys are trying to approach right now. But having black metal guys do it, that's definitely a path forward to me.
Interesting. Yeah. That's definitely a little on the bright side for me there, but it's but the fundamental idea I think is a good one. I think you're right. They should have keyboards in this band, and it's it definitely, like, you know, I would describe that part as strangely compelling. It's the original idea with having the keys in black metal was that, right? I mean, before Emperor accidentally took a trip to the wank bank, right? They were making extremely garagey music with keyboards.
Yeah.
And that was the whole sort of idea, that black metal was working on both of these levels, that it had this sort of raw go for the throat aggression while also doing the preposterous and quote-unquote tasteless thing of using ornate neoclassical keys. Just sort of completely rejecting punk and rocker ideas of what's tasteful. And that, you know, that's cool. I always liked that. I always wished more bands used keyboards, and not necessarily in, like, this is a symphonic black metal tribute kind of way. Right?
Yeah.
You know? Mm-hmm. It's, yeah, so, and that relates back to the idea that this band is, in some really, I think, commendable way, trying to grasp everything about black metal at once. Which is, you know, trying to incorporate the fullness of feeling you get on some of that original stuff.
Yeah, they're having fun, you know?
Yeah. So tell me what you think of this. Like, here, I think towards the end of the record, I start to hear something more like a consistent sound. In I Dwell in Torture, and then Before the Heretics Fork. I think you've got, like, there's parts that you like that kind of emo DSBM riffing stuff, but, like, in a very solemn way. And there are also parts I like that have this kind of American war metal sound, where you're not sure, like, is this Axis of Advance? Is this Amon Amarth? Is this Pan-American Native Front? Like, I don't care. I love those drums. It's, so let's, so towards the end of the record, they start to mesh those things pretty consistently. Let's listen. Here are some cool drum sounds. I feel like that's the payoff. Yeah, I mean, I feel like that part is earned by all the cool stuff, by like all the energetic stuff before.
That's interesting.
But
because I was listening to it and I was thinking, what we need here on this big slow riff is like a chiming kind of synth melody. Because you can hear the outline of how it descends across that riff. Da, 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 da. You know? Like kind of Sear Bliss style, you know?
yeah, no, I think you're right that there's definitely more room for the keys in the sound, and it would make this a little bit more than, as is, this is kind of a very stripped back, slow burn Bill Skernier riff, right? Or something of that sort, right? Yeah, and if you added keys, it would fill out the sonic space in a cool way. But yeah, before that, you could hear that sort of cascading, rough kind of single string trem stuff, trading with those big sort of barbarian power chord parts. And the drums on the blast beats, I really liked. I think there's good blasting all over this record, but like with the thinner guitar sound, you can really hear that sort of, that St. Anger snare, right? Which,
you got the percussive,
which I love. Yeah, you really hear sound quality in the drums, and rather than sort of tapping, right?
Yeah,
and they're up front in a pretty cool way, which is something we'll get into with the next band. But like I feel like there you've got, bringing it back to the concern of outlaw rock, this term we've come up with for all this American black metal stuff that doesn't really work like black metal or metal anymore. Bringing it back to that idea, well, a lot of those bands have those kinds of like big sort of big single string trem to like sort of bashing power chord parts, right? You've got your Mortem does that a lot. Elegiac did it more on this last record. Into Oblivion has the high IQ version of that. This seems to fit well into that. And it also has these shades of emo and screamo and stuff, which you've identified as it's this other really distinctively American guitar sound feeding into nowadays black metal. So, like, I feel like towards the end of the record, they start to approach something like this outlaw rock sound we've found in other bands. And the question is whether they want to go that way, or whether, do you think they should go that way, or do you think they should go in the more French direction, or do you think these are compatible because that very emotional riff at the end was kind of French?
I think they're kind of compatible, because I think the outlaw rock riffing style we've been talking about is ultimately Franco-Finnish in origin. You know what I mean? I think that is in terms of black metal, that's the sort of like founding part of it. And then I think what makes it outlaw rock is the incorporation of country and emo and American hard rock, these sort of like intrinsically American ideas. So I don't know. I think
lots of stompy hardcore from the Mysterious Guys scene.
Yeah, stompy hardcore, kind of garage rock stuff. It's a lot of things. I mean, we're making the genre right now on this podcast. So
sure. I agree. I mean, certainly we are not the we won't necessarily have the last say in that, but yes, it's certainly a direction this band could go in, and certainly like if it all ends up sounding like the last couple tracks, or maybe synthesized more with the couple you picked, right? It would definitely fit into that tradition.
Definitely. So overall, fun record. Looking forward to these guys like working on it a little bit more, figuring out exactly what they want to do, and we'll definitely be in touch for future material. So real quick, cool. So in terms of an interlude, what should we do?
I don't have anything now. I feel like every time you ask that, you have something in mind. So
I actually don't in this case, but you know what? Here's what we'll do. Let's go beyond metal. Let's go to some of the stuff that I talk about as being fundamental to outlaw rock. Let's just go with Dylan, man.
All right, cool. Yeah, I've been listening to more Dylan in part because you've been bringing it up in relation to this stuff.
Yeah, and you realize he's like the most black metal American folk guy ever.
I mean, I don't know about that exactly, but he's definitely got a certain kind. He's definitely cool, definitely really cool, and definitely got a lot of wisdom.
Well, let's just go with I'm not gonna do some like cool guy deep cut shit. Let's just go with the Times They Are A-Changin', man. It's an outstanding track.
Okay.
And we'll listen to that. And
All
we'll
right,
be back
cool.
with the back half of our show.
Samurai sword on my back. You don't know how to act. Maybe you should relax. Maybe you should relapse. Just kidding.
We are back after some sick-ass Dylan beats with Ulvegr's Isblod on Ashen Dominion, and you brought him onto the show, so I assume that you've got some experience with these guys?
Yeah, Ulvegr is a cool band. I have not owned one of their albums before, although I did just buy this one on Bandcamp, thanks to a Christmas gift from one of my best bros.
You're welcome, buddy.
Yeah. But they had a really cool album before called Where the Ice Cold Blood Storms. That's
what a fucking black metal album title.
Yeah, exactly. And that kind of sort of captures the ethos of the band, which is it is extremely Slavic sounding, but whereas people tend to associate Slavic stuff with either sort of lush druid atmospherics or sort of brutal droning abstraction like Hate Forest, or kind of swirling droning abstraction like BBH, right? This is basically Hate Forest and to some extent BBH guitar technique being just being front loaded into bulldozer aggressive black metal, right? These guys have some relation back to the earlier Ukrainian scene. They were both in a band called Runes of Dion Set, who were pretty crazy. And they both play in a band called Ig that was Ig that's pretty popular online. Ig YGG, that's one of the names of Odin, is Ig is like popular. It's one of those popular on the internet kind of atmo black bands, you know, atmospheric Slavic black metal. I don't like that band very much, but this is really, really good. Oh yeah, and this also has guys who were in chorus at one point. A guy who was in chorus is in this. So there's some common DNA going back into the Ukrainian scene. And I think what struck me back when I heard Where the Ice Cold Blood Storms is that it's just one of the few guitarists to really bother getting inside the kind of technique that Sanko developed, but certainly not ripping it off and doing, in some ways, taking a sound that's already extremely minimalistic and making it even more minimalistic. Mm-hmm. And sort of ratcheting up the aggression to a point where, you know, maybe only the early Hate Forest demos or some of those recent, like, pre-Cambrian recordings come close, right? And yeah, so let's just... you have any other overall thoughts about that? I know you've got some notes on sort of classic Norse influences in this.
Yeah, I do, but I'll get to them when the relevant samples occur.
Sure.
So, we'll just go in with your shit.
All right, yeah, I think a lot of these songs have kind of, maybe not portmanteaus, but just sort of compound words that just sound cool. So the first one is Jotuntre, which I think would mean maybe it means tree, I don't know, giant something. Second one is Dot Mork, which I guess just means probably something like death shadow, or, you know, the third one is Vargold. Not sure what old is, but Varg is obviously wolf. We've got Isblod, we've got Dunkelstorm, Nightstorm, and then we've got Askvind, right? So Ashwind. So they've just gone through Scandinavian, like they've just gone through Norse and German, making fucking cool sounding black metal words. Which
we always respect on this show.
Thoroughly approve, yes. So why don't we just start with a minute and a half into Jotuntre. This is the first track on the album. Slavic black metal go Bert.
It definitely go Burr. It's well, it's interesting because these are sort of traditional Slavic black metal songs, but compressed so hard. Like, all the songs are like 2-3 riff songs.
Yeah, and I mean, some Slavic black metal songs are like 2 or 3 riffs. Like, some Hate Forest songs are basically 2 or 3 riffs, but they're like 6 minutes. Whereas this is on the longer side for this record. This is 5:20. Well, no, Isblod's actually 8:40. So, but the record itself is very short, and yes, it is extremely minimalistic. We started off in this kind of like ripping D-beat section, right? You got these kind of octave swoop riffs that, I think we'd say come from Marduk generally, although it also weirdly reminded me of Vigadude when I heard that, who were influenced by a similar Slavic black metal, Marduk, all
Yeah,
that.
no,
But,
Vigadude is definitely a hardcore interpretation of Slavic black metal, I would say.
yeah, people think of Vigadude as a post-black band, and maybe there was a bit of that on their first record, but they're just extremely intense and extremely legitimate as a BM band. But yeah, so here you basically get like the basic machinery of this record. One thing I liked about it, I suppose, is that you went from that sort of octave swoop riff into another variation on the same style, but like with these more textured chords, and suddenly that thing that's basically like a Marduk riff, which is not what you are supposed to, like, not the cliche Slavic black metal thing. Suddenly that's basically the climax. And you get this sort of like tight whiplashing power chords, and it swoops up to that fifth in a way that makes it sound really epic in a way it might not otherwise. But then, boom, big, massive, strangely shaped, like 16-bar long Blazebirth Hall kind of melody thing, right?
Yeah, no, I think that, God, who would I compare this to? From last year. One of our favorite records of last year. I just have to remember what the band was called.
It's late on Sunday, guys. Gjendod.
Gjendod, exactly. That is what I would compare this band most clearly to that we've covered before. This is sort of a minimal Gjendod, who are already kind of minimal themselves. But Gjendod, like, strings together a massive number of very minimal riffs. Ulvegr is just like, here's our 3 riffs. You enjoy it or you don't. And here you go.
Yeah, Ulvegr, Gjendod is more trying for a certain kind of dramatic structure in each songs. This band gets its drama. This is a band that has sort of a rigorous version of the here's a riff, here's a riff, here's a riff approach, where it's like, because the structure is relatively blocked off, it stands or falls with the way that each riff feeds into the next. And so, like, it stands or falls on pure melody and rhythm, and this band does that really well. And a thing I'll get to with my next sample also is you could hear that when they want to open it up a little more, they can, but they're completely in control of that, and they always dial it back in, right?
Yeah, this is very, shit, is there a thing such as post-BBH? I mean, like, this might be like post-Blazebirth Hall, in a way. Clearly, Blazebirth Hall is a big influence in the melodic structure of this material. But the sort of, like, resolute, percussive viciousness of this music points to stuff that is a lot more conventional in a way. Like you said, Marduk, I would say Dark Funeral is like a big point for this band. Who, again, I've mentioned this on previous episodes, but Dark Funeral is a very underrated black metal band amongst serious black metal people, I would say. I think they're actually excellent, and they've just been kind of ghettoized into, oh, it's like blast beats and tremolo riffs, man.
They were everyone's go-to for explaining the Norse core sound, right? But now that we're over that era, it's a little easier to step back and reevaluate it.
Yeah, exactly. So speaking
within the go.
Oh no, I was going to lean to the next sample unless you have something else.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I was just going to say within the Slavic scene, you could compare it to things that are the stuff that people don't stereotypically associate with the scene as much. You could compare it to Astrophase, especially the earlier stuff, like Through the Eyes of the Beast or whatever. Astrophase has a lot of more traditional kind of Scandi black stuff on it. And a friend of mine once compared the energy in Astrophase records to like Sodom, which gives you an idea. Something like that. There's also, in terms of like being literally after Blazebirth Hall, there's that Nitberg full length, which is basically BBH guys doing their own sort of interpretation of a big, sprawling, aggressive black metal album. I could hear a similarity there. Also, do you remember Old Wains? I barely remember how that band sounds, but they were definitely closer to an eccentric take on down the line black metal, right? They're from Russia, right?
I always tie Old Wains to shit like, I mean, it's been forever since I've actually listened to it, but I always tied it to stuff like Nigura Bunget, at least like the early stuff by them, of being definitively Slavic but kind of abstract at the same time.
Yeah, I don't remember it well. I remember associating Old Winds with like a more kind of power chordy aggro approach, but it's been years, so who knows?
Yeah.
All right, so let's go to your sample.
So, Dort Morke. This is where this album struck me, listening to the second track. We're just going to listen to the opening couple minutes, and I will talk about a few aspects of this band that really strike me. The big one being the drumming, so pay attention to that on this sample. Dude, this album is all about the drums, I believe.
Yeah, the drums are great.
It's, the drums have a very death metal quality to them, I would say. It almost strikes me a little bit like Derek Roddy from, like, Hate Eternal. It's like, it's a river of blast beats, but the way those blast beats are applied is very important. Like, they are suggesting an even greater aggression than they manifest in the playing. You know, the way the blast beat starts, you know, a half note before the riff begins, sort of thing. It's like, it's going in. It has an impossible fucking savage energy to it. It's outstanding. And within those blast beats, there are wonderful musical elements, like these sort of like chiming ride cymbal ideas. There's a musicality to it that strikes me beyond a lot of black metal performances like this.
Yeah, no, that's great blasting. It's certainly being done. It's being done intentionally rather than as a default, right? That'd be one way of putting it. It's like this guy means to blast. You also identified that kind of blasting on Precambrian, right?
Yes.
So I think to some extent, this kind of blasting is just, hang on, sneeze, becoming more common in, I guess, nowadays Slavic BM. But I understand what you mean about the death metal thing. Hate Eternal definitely seems right. Also, the way they've just pushed the snare way to the fore.
Yeah.
In the mix. And you were saying interesting things about the timing too. Like, or that's certainly something I heard as well. Is like the drummer is playing, he's not neatly following the rhythm of the guitar. You don't just get fills where the riff ends, right? And
yeah,
he's doing things with the fills. He's doing things with the fills that, like, punctuate the middle of the riff. Things like that.
Yeah, no, it's not, because in a lot of black metal, the blast beat just, like, functions as a sort of hypnotic background rhythm. That's not the case here. The drums are way up front in the production. You're clearly supposed to pay attention to it, at least as much as the guitars, if not more. It's just like incredibly savage music, which is kind of like Yendod, like we were talking about before.
Yeah. And like Yendod, it's two dudes, so you could really see it as a pretty even partnership between the Helg, who's doing the vocals, guitars, and bass, and Odolv, who's doing the drums. And then they've also got a guest on lead guitars named Starg. But yeah, so it's a fairly even partnership. I do really like the riffing on this record, in part because of its sort of discipline, and because it's just, there is almost nothing that is done to, there are very few like attention grabbing kinds of riffs. It's just all solid, really solid riffing. But let's go to the middle of, or about a minute into Vargold, because I think we've got something more about the timing there too.
No!
it's an interesting thing to talk about, because I was going to say, well, but a lot of that's kind of like post-black riffing, but post-black is mostly just descended from like a BBH riffing, so it's kind of hard to find the origin, you know?
Yeah, most of that's just pure Slavic black metal riffing. The thing at the beginning is really like Hate Forest more than BBH even. There are like abstract swirling parts in the middle of Hate Forest songs. This whole sample was like this is the most Hate Foresty song on the record. And it's cool because this band is not it's clearly inspired in that tradition, but I've never heard this band as sounding like a clone of that or a tribute to that. It's just a continuation. So what was cool about that first riff, that, definitely atmospheric. It definitely does get kind of close to that Devilgroth stuff we were talking about last week from Siberia, right?
Yeah.
In terms of like how that riff, I found that riff just difficult to sample part of, so I just chose the whole thing. It's like where a vocal pattern ends is maybe in the middle of the riff. And then the places where the drums accent often fall in different spots in the middle of the riff, and they're all kind of seem to start in different places and cross each other in these interesting ways, which is kind of related to that feeling we got at the end of the Devilgroth, where it was like in some of those parts you can't find the one rhythmically, right?
Yeah.
And there's this kind of way that like it's very difficult to figure out where you haven't really heard the whole riff until you've heard all of its iterations. Like there is a melody there that repeats probably like 8 times, 16 times, but it's a lot longer than you initially think. And like it's once you're in it, it's very hard to figure out where it stops, except right when it stops, right? That's great drumming. They lock right back in. Dum, 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 dum. That is a... and then you go into that rolling part, which is, very, very Hate Foresty. But, like, it's a pretty cool idea where they've, like... Although their goals are very different from the more far-out Slavic bands, they clearly get the most abstract parts of those bands, and they're just, they're using it for a targeted effect within certain songs, which is pretty cool.
Well, yeah. Well, like, while we were listening, I mentioned that, that big riff, that dun, 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 that's a, sort of motif variation of a riff off the first sample you played. And I think that's something that goes across this record. There's like a handful of distinct melodic roots, and then there's just variations off them, which is something we're noticing more and more with like cool black metal bands. Like they're acknowledging that they're doing distinct, obvious variations of these simple melodic ideas that they're obsessed with for whatever reason. And I think that that's one of the strengths of this record, is this rigorous consistency. I would say that it's not like all the way there yet. They need a few more like huge dramatic ideas.
No, they don't. That's
they
you.
do.
That's your personal taste. That's your personal taste, bud.
Okay.
Which is fair.
I'm being
it's
very
not to
cruel here.
It's not to your personal taste, right? Which is fair. But like this band has been, I mean, they've been at it for like a decade. So it's not a new band. This is just kind of how they sound. The refusal. I think the refusal of those big moments is crucial. And I feel like, at least from my perspective, like those big flowing trem passages, like those are the big climax parts.
I mean, I get that. And hey, don't talk shit. Forest is one of my favorite bands of all time, and they don't have riffs. Period. So, but
That's Forest has relatively catchy melodic ideas in it, right? You know, especially compared to the other BPH bands. But I'm not
but
talking
they play them for 8 minutes at a time. So
yeah, I'm not talking shit about your taste. I'm saying that is your taste, but like this band is clearly after something else.
well, yeah, I would just say I have no problem with them repeating the climax several times on an album. That's fine. I just think that for these guys, like, I like the kind of like mechanistic savagery of this music. But I just like a couple more types of melodies would add a lot to it to me.
Yeah, I mean, they could. There's certainly all the material here to make something more ambitious if they wanted. I think what I like about this record is it punches above its weight class. It doesn't, it has way more going on in it in terms of melody, harmony, rhythm, percussive drumming attack, crazy vocals. It's got way more going on than initially signals. Because it has this extremely, it sets itself these very limited parameters, which you might identify with limited ambitions. Like, we're just going to make a quick ripping black metal album, and then like dramatically overperforms within those parameters. So like, yeah, I don't doubt that they could do something more ambitious if they wanted to. And, you know, it is true that this record is, it's true that like this record is relatively short, right? And I think generally they release relatively short. I think the idea is, you know, you distill all the best riffs down. You have just these very tight songs. You get in, you get out on each record. But like, yeah, I think they could write something more expansive for sure. And they clearly have other riffing styles up their sleeves.
Well, in terms of expansive songs, wonderful segue.
All right.
My last sample. It's off the title track, Isblod. This is an Immortal song. I'm not sure exactly which one it is. I'm convinced it is literally an Immortal song. But I did some scanning through what I knew from Immortal, and I wasn't able to find it exactly. But I do think it's a pastiche of some ideas of some of the less known songs off Sons of Northern Darkness, and maybe At the Heart of Winter, which I'm not as acquainted with.
I like At the Heart of Winter, so let's see.
Yeah,
I know
you
that
might
one pretty
know.
well.
So let's check off the middle section of Isblod. My hand to God, that is an Immortal song. I just don't know which one it is.
Then it's great, right?
It's very good. No, there's nothing wrong with that. I think that, if anything, more people should be ripping off all of Immortal's work. The idea, a lot of people have talked about, I remember when we were coming up in black metal, people talked about Immortal clones. And all of those bands that I would listen to didn't actually sound like Immortal, because Immortal's riffing style is extremely distinct and very unusual compared to the rest of black metal, because they're basically thrash riffs that just are very trebly in the production, so people think they're black metal riffs.
Well, and people have talked about them as being closely related to Morbid Angel, right?
Yeah, they were always kind of the most death thrash of black metal bands.
Yeah.
But then you get albums like Battles in the North, which are totally singular. Nobody's ever fully replicated that sound. It's just pure genius, But this, I think, is very tightly tied to late Immortal, especially Sons of Northern Darkness. Because I was listening to this, and I was listening against it to some late Immortal stuff, and I think there's threads you can pull on some of the forgotten songs off Sons of Northern Darkness, like Beyond the North Waves, Antarctica, maybe In My Kingdom Cold, shit like that. Obviously, the drumming was never that relaxed on Immortal, but it's impossible to listen to this and not hear Immortal doing fucking Nordland by Bathory,
Yeah, I think these bands have, I think Immortal has, especially the later Immortal stuff, has had a big influence, but a subtle one. Yeah, one people haven't noticed that much on just what kind of epic or heathen sounding black metal sounds like now. And definitely on the turn towards more sort of consonant melody and stuff, for sure. And also maybe, I think that was always... there's another band called Blutfahne, Blutfahne, from Ukraine, who also have a lot of Immortal in their sound. More than this. There are kind of those kind of big epic Immortal lead runs. Although there are a few of those on this record. And so that synthesis seems to be big in Ukraine right now. And more than that, it was always kind of built into Hate Forest. If you were to take maybe, I spent a lot of time thinking about Hate Forest, and if you were to take 5 maybe bands that they were referencing, it'd be something like Eternus, Hades, Bolt Thrower, Immortal would be up there. What's the fifth? It's Graveland. Yeah, but it's it really would be like a cluster of those. And I think back in the day, people used to compare Hate Forest to Immortal more. I think now that sort of whole sound has become its own niche, people don't even bother comparing it to stuff because it's just canonical. But that kind of sort of sheets of semi-dissonant chord you can definitely hear in a lot of Immortal stuff, right? And the sort of continuous blasting. Yeah. So yeah, looks like the Immortal is coming to the surface here. Yeah, and that one's pretty epic. I listened to that last night walking around in under 20 degrees Fahrenheit at night, so that was good.
Good record. I definitely want to check out the older stuff, see how it stacks up, and we'll take a quick break, get back to our last album of the night.
This is a little one Gash, and you're listening to Terminus.
Alright, we are back with Pan-American Native Front, with the second full-length record, Little Turtles War. And I think that you've actually listened to Tecumseh's War, the first record. Is that correct?
Nah, not really. Years ago. I mean, I think I checked it out. I think it sounded... Tecumseh's War was like, I think, more in the vein of the most kind of dark throny kind of black and roll moments on the split. At least that's what the impression I remember. It could have been that this band has quite a bit of range, so it could have been just that was the part I clicked on years ago. I don't want to be like, I don't want to claim knowledge of something I don't know about.
You don't want to be authoritative about it.
Yeah, no. But we did, on episode 26, which is still one of the best we've done, we did review the Pan-American Native Front and Ifernach split, right? And that was a great one. And that was a big moment for our ongoing conversation about a specifically American black metal sound. And we discussed that in relation to bands like Mortem that had a kind of Euro aspect on that. And since then, we've extended that in all sorts of places. Oldowan Gash has this kind of country western vibe. We've followed that to Elegiac the other week, right? When we talked about the notion of outlaw rock. And we definitely think that idea of a sort of American, distinctly sort of black metal derived American sound that isn't really black metal anymore, definitely also applies to a bunch of the stuff that's getting associated with the native scene and also with the kind of Mexican and Central American scene. So we've got the Macuajitl that we covered the other week, right, would fall into this.
Well, how are we going to define outlaw rock? Well, it's black metal, in a sense, and then you have these threads of distinctly American movements. American country music, emo, garage rock, blues, all this stuff. And then you kind of gestate it into a whole.
Yeah, I think the other central thing is that it's a shift in sort of thematics and energy, right? So, like, this is the general idea of black metal moving from this sort of nocturnal or lunar form to being, at least in some parts of the world, increasingly solar, right? Or the idea of moving from this sort of, in some sense elitist but extremely antisocial ideal, right, to a more kind of mature idea of a certain kind of nobility, right? And so in Europe, that has become, that's the chivalric French bands or whatever, or that is the Italian bands, right, Spite Extreme Wing and all that. Over here, that model is much more like the outlaw, right? The sort of the cowboy and or Indian, right?
Yeah.
And so here, that's the distinctively American version of this type, and that's a thing that makes it both very much derived from the BM tradition, but kind of distinct at this point, very distinct. And as you said, all these elements of things that are very extrinsic to the original language of black metal makes it different. But this record, I think, compared to Macuajitl or Oldowan Gash or even Elegiac, I feel like this does feel a lot more like a down-the-line black metal record.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. This is more like black metal, but obviously, if this is an idea we're going to define, it's going to involve records which blur those lines.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think this is a very important one. Because I would say, as far as outlaw rock goes, defining it, the big one, like, there's things before it, but the big thing that, like, strikes out to us, I would say, is Con su pistola en la mano by Macuajitl. Yeah. Like, that is a fucking bullet in the direction of this idea that we've been talking about.
So maybe we should talk about the music, huh? Let's go to...
Yeah, we probably should.
Yeah, so let's go to Power of the Calumet Dance. I think that this record shows that PANF has really made good on a lot of the strengths of the split with Ivernach. I mean, clearly these tracks were probably all recorded before that split came out, but you know what I mean, right?
Yeah.
And on that record, I pointed to say I said that like the kind of default blast riffing was maybe the weaker spot, like a little bit too rooted in this sort of like standard evil black metal kind of Slayer scale power chord stuff, Dark Throne stuff. But there were other moments also of blasting that were just absolutely ripped and had really cool sort of dense harmonies in them. And here, that's basically just the default blast sound. And so I'm quite happy about that. Let's check it out. So that's a part that, like, and it's got one riff or two riffs and these kind of predictable change-ups, right? That was almost 2 minutes of blasting. And there were probably like 4 or 5 different riffs in there, some of which don't recur.
Yeah.
And a really nice range of sound quality. Like, so you get that initial blasting riff, which I've always said, I said before too, this guy's more textured blast parts really remind me of Nidden Division 187. This kind of like alternate idea of war metal that comes just within black metal. Kind of just grinding dissonant chords, a lot of churn with the drums. And you've got that, but then you've got just this big smashing pentatonic power chords. And then we're firmly in this kind of American outlaw scene, right? And you can hear how it relates to native music for sure. You can also see how it relates to native music as it's represented in the movies, right? And all that. And
which is an important thing to talk about, you know, which is like our idea of native music, even amongst a lot of native guys who didn't necessarily grow up on the res, so to speak. Their understanding of the culture is obviously inflected from like film and popular culture. And I think reconquering that and readopting it is an important part of the sort of spiritual essence of it, if you know what I mean.
A little bit, yeah. I would say a lot of these guys are probably made an effort to be familiar with their, obviously with whatever has been preserved of their native traditions, right? But like, I think there's definitely an effort to incorporate. Sure, yeah, you sort of part of the image we've been given is through Hollywood, and how do you reappropriate that? Absolutely, yeah. I mean, you know, the other thing it relates to generally with this is like there was that whole thing back in the day of like, oh, don't call us noble savages, right? That's a sort of stereotype projected by and it's like, well, that's what black metal is about, right?
Black metal is about the noble savage.
Exactly. So whether you call it the barbarian or the the overlord or the whatever, right? It's something, yes, that fits right into that. So in some sense, it is leaning into that kind of sort of warrior archetype that was presented in the movies, right?
Yeah, I get that. No, I think a big part of this music is the idea of we have a perception of native culture, and we have the reality of it. And there are elements of truth to the popularized depiction of it. And how do we, not we, as like a random white guy, but how does someone take that essence that people are so familiar with and reincorporate it with the reality to make it more powerful?
Yeah, how do you tap into the parts that authentically resonate with you and that have some truth to them? That makes sense. And in a certain sense, that's what black metal did with folk music too, right? Because they were dealing with, maybe we already talked about this in episode 26, but if you think about like ideas of folk music in black metal, or what sounds epic, or what sounds barbarian, often those are just strongly inflected by the Conan the Barbarian soundtrack.
Yeah.
Like, I think that was, like, literally a musical influence on Graveland, and on Bathory, for sure. And so folk music, as you get it in these suggestions of folk in music, in popular culture, and in, maybe also in classical music, which itself, of course, doesn't have a direct relationship to that. But yeah, it's like, how do you take that, how do you take this stuff that sounds ancient and give it a kind of, make it more than a reference point, right?
Yeah, because, like, I mean, we were talking about this a little bit, like, between sections, like, the idea that all of us in North America have grown up with our parents' music, which is a lot more kind of unified than our music. So these are indelible, unarguable parts of our musical and artistic DNA. We must incorporate them in some sense. Whether they are correct or authentic or something like that, or not. They are a part of how we understand art. And we must reckon with that to a degree,
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think there's something about reclaiming. I mean, yeah, I don't know if I'd associate it specifically with our parents. I see what you mean. I think we were talking about parents' generation in relation to like stuff like Dylan, right, and this kind of boomer rock music that has made its way back into a lot of this newer stuff. But what sample do you want to go to next? I've got another one from early in the record, but if you want to take one now, we could do that too.
Yeah, sure. Oh. I mean, I can jump on one of mine, but
yeah, jump on. Okay, cool.
So here's one off a later track on the record. It's called "The Great White Beaver Lurks." So there's been a variety of kind of like slow black metal songs throughout black metal history, these kind of funereal black metal dirges. Mm-hmm. But this one has its own essence, because I think we talked about on the review last year of the Ephronach and Pan-Amerikan split that this feels like a drummer band. It's a one-man project, but it feels like drums are the main texture of this music. And I think this is a track...
for sure.
Yeah, I think this is a track that really evidences that. So let's listen to this and talk a little bit about what we hear in terms of percussion being the primary voice of this music. So isn't this basically like an attempt to establish an American Bathory in a way?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think the Bathory is huge for Elegiac too, right?
Yeah.
And definitely, yeah, I hear that. So how do you mean? It has to do with the drums there, right? The kind of Hammerheart drums.
Extremely Hammerheart or Bloodfire Death. Definitely in that very last section of the sample, you get that ride cymbal kicking in, and it's kind of like this very insistent accent on the ride cymbal. This it's a blacksmith hammering a sword. Dun 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 dun. You know,
well,
it's
probably not a sword. Maybe a war club, right?
Yeah, something like that. You know, well, that's the important thing, is that all these things blur together, you know? Part of our, whatever we want to interpret as our cultural history, you know?
Yeah, I think we talked before about how some of the movies and things rely heavily on certain troped sonic cues, and a lot of the same cues that were used for Indians were also used for Vikings, right? Like, bum, 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 bum... Bum, bum,
oh, yeah.
bum, 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 bum,
you know,
bum, 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 bum.
I think
bum,
one of the parts...
Bum, 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 right?
I think one of the important parts about understanding this kind of music is to get away from the idea of what is real, what is a distant cultural memory, what is, the idea of authenticity is important, but ultimately not as relevant as how do we define ourselves today.
I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure I subscribe to that distinction in the same way. But it definitely, I hear what you mean about that there's so much of this that involves the creative work on a certain legacy and work within certain parameters in a given situation. I think that's right. It comes out of it comes out of this extended sense of tradition. But again, I would be. I'm sure all of these guys are deeply interested in their sort of indigenous music and folkways, right? And that comes in various ways.
Yeah.
And I think that resonates. A funny thing about with the drum forward. This we might have talked about this on episode 26 too. But so much of a podcast is repeating yourself for new people, reminders, and people listen to half the show or whatever. But like also the idea of like another classic. Here's a good example. Like here's a trope that has something to do with reality, right? Like drumming, important in actual Native American, Northern Native American culture, right? Right? Like, medicine, drums, whatever. I don't know enough about it to give you anything more than that, right? But like shamanic drumming, ritual drumming, whatever. In the movies, right, it's the trope of, oh God, Jim, do you hear them war drums? Like they're coming. Like, and here that's clearly a thing that's being owned. Right? It's like, okay, we're associated with these, like, war drums prior to scalping time. All right. Here they are, right? And this track is a very, like, war drums track.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, all right, let's go to this next one, Battle of the Wabash. This is where we're dialing it back. This record has a strongly narrative feeling. A lot of these tracks are longer than you might expect and have big shifts in them. And I feel like he pretty much always pulls it off. There are even some tracks that basically, like the album has an overture, basically. And we were talking before about how that's a difficult thing to do. But, the album itself and a few songs just have beginnings where there's just a bunch of riffs and then something will happen, like a rifle fires or something, and then the song starts.
Yeah.
But it's always enjoyable to hear that stuff. And, obviously it ties back to the idea that he wants this record to be thematically commemorating Little Turtles War, which I should have looked up before we started talking about this. However, I'm sure everyone else who reviews this will talk about
I did some research. It's pretty interesting because it was much closer to the American Revolution than a lot of people probably imagine. It's only like 10 years after that it started.
And this is located where?
Around what would have been the Ohio Territory, the Northwest Territory of the United States. I won't talk about it
the upper
too much.
Midwest.
Yeah. I won't talk about it too much just because it's a very intricate kind of conflict, but Little Turtle was a major war chief of a band of various native tribes at the time. Who fought very aggressively to protect the western area beyond the Ohio River as native territory, basically. Resulting in some of the most dramatic losses of the American army at the time. Went on for probably 10 years. Some of it blended into the War of 1812 a little bit later. But a very interesting forgotten part of American history, I would say.
Word. Okay, yeah. And that is one of the good things that black metal albums can do, right? Is we talked about that a little bit with Ulvegr, too, right? They're writing about this bizarre episode where the British military shelled the capital of shelled Copenhagen. Right?
Yeah.
That's not something anybody has heard about, right? But there's this way of creating alternate histories, right? Within this music. Yeah. So, and bringing those certainly to audiences that probably wouldn't be aware of it otherwise. So, let's go to the Battle of the Wabash. Yeah, here he's just done that thing where there's an overture, a gunshot, and a 2-riff sequence without vocals. And he's just repeated those, he's done those 2 riffs. And now he's going to repeat those 2 riffs with vocals. And it sounds great. So,
Right.
Yeah, so that was exciting, right?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, and so this is a kind of similar mechanism to the one I was doing before, highlighting before on Power of the Calumet Dance, where you get several different voicings of a single mood. So this part is supposed to feel, I mean, God, most of this record feels epic and martial, right? But here we get specifically of riffs with that color. So riffs that are outside kind of aggro or dissonant black metal territory. You get two voicings, right? First you get the sort of barbarian or noble savage pentatonic, right? And then this sort of brash chest thumping sort of thing, right? Off with blasts. And then we slow, and it drops into this kind of slightly melancholy French riff, right? Da, 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 da. Da, da, da. And that's an example of, as you said, that style being pretty fundamental for a lot of these American bands. But like, he doesn't sit there. That's just one tool he uses, and then we move on into this solo that's extremely aggressive, which I like. But when I heard that big riff, I thought, I know that riff, and it took me a minute to find it. I don't know that this is, did he consciously say, I want to write something inspired by this? Who knows? Has he heard this record? Probably, because I'm sure this guy knows all the deep cuts, right? But here is the climax of Under the Sign of the Beast from Dornu Foglith by Osculum and Fam. Had you heard that before, bro?
I have not heard that, but that is my new favorite band.
Right? Isn't that awesome?
That's so good. Holy shit, man.
And that is they didn't play that riff in that song. That's like way well into that song. I think it's like 8 minutes in. They haven't played that riff before that point. Uh-oh, cat disaster.
How did you know? Yeah, my cat's knocked over a bunch of shit. Anyway, go on.
Well, at that point, they've already played just a bunch of different sick riffs that are melodically related to it, and then that's the payoff right there at the end of the track. But yeah, so Osculum and Fam kind of at the root of a lot of the French black metal that's been extremely influential. They have connections to Seigneur Voland, they have connections to Bakira, and there's that riffing style there, and it's you can hear it's a little bit more flamboyant, right, on the more flamboyant side. And this guy takes an idea like that and he puts it over this sort of really sturdy rolling 6/8 kind of vibe. And changes the mood a lot, but he keeps that kind of, I don't know, I just think it's, I like riffing a lot like that when it's done in this, there it really does have a climactic feel in Battle of the Wabash in the same way it does in that other song.
Yeah, I get that.
So
But ultimately,
last sample.
Last sample. This is off the closing track. This is the final passage off the closing track, actually. This track is called, bear with me, Nakaniaki.
Oh, God. Oh, no, don't do it, Death Metal Guy. Don't even attempt it.
Nakaniaki Mikwi Libakinisiki. And I'm comfortable saying that for the people listening to us, this is outlaw rock. To give it some context, this is a long track, and this passage is coming off the very end of what is, I would argue, unmistakably an American emo clean guitar passage.